26 and 28 at the All-Star break. That's what we expected. Guess what? There's no Suns basketball for a week, and for some reason, that feels like a good thing. Welcome into the PHNX Suns show presented by Bet365. Download that Bet365 app and use that promo code PHNX365 when you sign up and find out why, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. I'm Espo. That is my man, Steven. The brains of the basketball here on the program. I'm just the pretty face that's going to hand the ball over to him and let him run with it today. But before we get to it, let's set a like goal. I've got low expectations, just like the Suns. Let's put it at 100 today. Let's make it simple. Get us to 100 in the next hour. So smash that like button. Steven, we have reached the All-Star break. Somehow this team is 26 and 28. We got through the final game on Wednesday against Houston. What most stands out to you from the first part of this season?
Inconsistency. You show pockets where this team looks like a team that should be where the roster suggests they should be, and then you see that followed up with lows. Some of the highest of highs, some of the lowest of lows. Some of them coming over the course of quarters, yet alone in one specific game. And that feels like that's been par for the course for this team for a majority of this first half and then some as we get to the All-Star break.
I feel like this last week has been a microcosm of kind of it all. You have Devin Booker become the career scoring leader for the Suns.
Yep.
Kevin Durant becoming only the 8th player ever to have 30,000 points in their career. I believe it was the 3rd fastest to do it as well. And then they both come in losses, and this team sub 500. And to me, that encapsulates everything. The greatness of Kevin Durant and, how good Devin Booker has been is fairly undeniable. Some will try. We've seen it in our chat.
Yeah.
Some are wrong. But that part has been undeniable. But in some way, to your point, with so much inconsistency, they found a way to just not be a good basketball team. And it goes back to chemistry to me. Like, it continues to be the fact that GMs, not just here, across sports and in the NBA as well, forget that there's such a human element to what makes good teams, right? You can't just microwave it. You can't just jam, 5, 6 extremely talented individuals in a room and go make it great, right? And I think that's part of this inconsistency is maybe they don't just work together. And that's not a knock on a Kevin Durant or a Devin Booker or a Bradley Beal or even a Tyus Jones. But if you don't look at it from the human perspective, the personalities, and from an overall basketball strategy, immense talent isn't always going to win. It's building culture, building an identity, and figuring out how the pieces fit that is most important.
It is. And that's why the science of building a team is valued as highly as it is. It's why I feel like the people in the decision-making positions for each respective team, there has to be some semblance of a proof of concept to your vision because otherwise you're just hoping to fall upon a lucky star, pull a rabbit out of a hat in a sense. I don't see the vision with the team right now with James Jones in this iteration of it at least. Obviously, we saw it with the Twins and when they added Chris Paul, with DeAndre Ayton and Devin Booker ascending and all of that. But since the 2022 playoffs, when they lost to the Denver Nuggets, the vision hasn't been the most clear. Like you could identify what the team's identity was in the iteration prior to that, but since then, it's been a lot more ambiguity than it has been. You can point to specific things that you know this team will do in certain moments, regardless of who's in and out the lineup. And I think that variance that's kind of existed in this period of time since then has led to where we are now.
I think you're 100% right in not having a true vision in what you're trying to build. Like wanting to be a champion and wanting to be the best, those are great. Those are ideals, but that's not a strategy. That's not a plan. Honestly, it's not a vision, right? That is an end goal that you want to get to, but you don't just go from I'm going to throw talent together to the end goal without building in between and having that true strategy on how to get you there. And that feels like the missing piece, and you look at it and they've had 3 coaches in as many years.
Yep.
I would not be shocked if we have 4 going into, the summer. And when you don't have that overarching vision, this happens. I'm surprised. I never thought I'd say this, but I actually think letting Monty Williams go, even though it felt like the situation may have run its course, probably eroded what was left of any kind of identity for this team. Because say what you will about him and the success that they had, but obviously limited when you saw the playoff collapses. He knew what he was trying to accomplish with his guys, and he knew how he was going to approach it. And he came in with a confidence of that and a quiet confidence. Frank Vogel came in with a brash confidence, basically calling himself the Star Whisperer, but couldn't figure it out. I think Coach Bud's been somewhere in between, but he obviously hasn't brought in a plan that's being able to execute. We always go back to how is this team not able to succeed? And I think that's the part that is under talked about, viewed when it comes to this, is all that work that has to go in that isn't on the court, that isn't in a free agency period to actually put you in a successful position.
Yeah. Now, I will say Monty had the side of being able to spend more time with the players that were on the roster.
That's fair.
Naturally, if you're cultivating culture, you're building relationships, it's going to take more than just 82 games and however many weeks are dispersed about those 82 games to do so. But even with that and without that part included, it always felt like since Monty, neither of the Suns coaches that they've had have had the reach needed from star player to last player 15 on the roster that in the way in which Monty did. You can say there are many different reasons why. It feels like Monty's rosters were more built for his style of play to be successful. It hasn't quite felt like the Suns had a roster that Frank Vogel maybe needed to play to the strengths of his coaching. And for Bud, you can kind of say it a little bit as well. And not to give those guys alibis, but when you're talking about building those relationships and the trust and confidence that comes with seeing, okay, he wants me to do this, and we're able to execute to that, and we see that this is always the result when we do that, and when we don't do it, this is the result we get. I feel like those lines have been a lot more blurred with the last 2 coaches than it was with Monty.
I'm going to ask this. I'm going to spring this on you. I didn't prep you for this, but do you feel when you have such a top-heavy roster like this team does with stars that maybe it's beneficial to have a coach who actually played in the league, a guy that has experienced some of that, to have that connection with them? Just kind of a thought, but Monty had that as well. And I wonder if sometimes when it gets hard, when you have these lulls like this team has faced, if there's a little bit more trust in a guy who's been in the league, who's played in the league, who knows what it's like to go through that grind.
I can see why you might think that. I think that's it's contextual. It depends on what the scenario is, what type of players, what type of personalities are all involved more than anything. But I think that maybe the biggest thing a coach can have in those scenarios is proof that they won the championship. And albeit it's not a big three that was the likes of Beal, Durant, and Booker, it was still a big three with Drew Holiday and Chris Middleton and more than anybody, Giannis Antetokounmpo. So I think just having that ring and having it be recent, it's not like it was last decade. It was within the last 3 seasons. Should be enough, but it's clear that his reach to that Bucks team that he had is not the same as what he has here with the Suns. And again, that might not even be fair because it's been just barely over a half a season compared to multiple seasons with that iteration of the Bucks. So some of it is time, but when you're in win now mode, it's hard to find that time, especially when you're the second coach that's come into a group with this big three construct.
Yeah, again, it's that microwave, trying to microwave all this and make it happen in an instant where you have a window that's very, very small that is closing faster than you imagined with this situation. I think you're right. Last question before we shift gears, but is this a systemic failure from top to bottom, from ownership to front office to coaching to even the players in this first half to find yourself 2 games under 500 right now?
I mean, yes, you're far under exceeding or far below where you were expecting to be at this point in the season. Even in Doomsday, you would never guess that they would have been 2 games below 500 going into the All-Star break. And because of that, I don't think that any existing party is absolved of blame in any capacity. Even Kevin Durant, for as great as he's been, maybe there's something that he could have done different over these last however many weeks it's been to change things. Matt Ishbia, albeit him being hands-off in terms of the day-to-day and the grind that's going on the court and the adjustments and the financials and the front office and everything, that's not his specific task. But nobody can be absolved of blame. I feel like Giannis caught flack earlier this season because he called out everybody, literally everybody in the Bucks organization when they started off 1-0, whatever their record was through the first month. But that's the reality of it. When you're underwhelming to this extent, there can be no specific person that's to blame for it. And also, the blame has to be dispersed evenly across everybody for you to figure out how to recourse and get back where you want to be.
Yeah, I feel like nobody's really stepped up and said, hey, I'm going to take at least my portion of this blame, where Giannis wasn't afraid to take his portion and then say, but I need other people to do their job too. And that's felt like part of what has been lost in this. Jersey Joe in the chat says, facts, Expo. Monty had his flaws, but players believed in him and played hard for him, minus DeAndre. And then Toasty73 says, 4 coaches in 4 years never happened before. It would be embarrassing for the team. I struggle with this thought about having to worry about the context of that kind of stuff, because at some point it either works or it doesn't. And if you sit there and just because of the perception you stay in the situation, that's just unhealthy and doesn't get you any closer to the reality of things. Like, sure, does that mean that you've admitted you've made mistakes the last 3? Or really it's the last 2, because Monty, you could argue, like we said, time had run up with it. So you're admitting you screwed up over the last 2 years with 2 coaches. I'd much rather have that than stick with, Bud and not have any path forward if that's the way you go with it and continue to have the same problems. That's insanity in and of itself. You don't stay, at least you shouldn't stay in a bad situation, just because, well, it might look bad if I leave or if I change the way that this goes. So I don't buy into that.
Yeah, that especially when you, again, this context for the Suns is so different than most other scenarios because it's very much win now. The financials suggested, the level of play of the players at the top of the roster all suggested, the head coach that they brought in addition to the one that preceded him last season, suggests just that the owner coming in guns blazing and all of his prerogatives and what he's desired for the organization, all aligns with win now. So the allotment of time that you may have been allowed, like a coach like Monty, the Suns were not in win now mode when they got him.
No.
They didn't get to win now mode until his last 2 seasons.
Yeah,
and really that last season specifically, because the first season was, we don't know, they might be an 8 seed, they might be a 5th seed, they might be a 7 seed. We don't know what they're gonna be. It was trial by error, and that error was so loud they ultimately ended up in the finals.
Yeah, I mean, that wasn't a win now.
That was not a win now
pleasant
season.
surprise.
Right, and everything that came after that, they realized the potential of the roster and what they had, including the coach, and that's what kind of got us to where we are now. Mm-hmm. So all of that to say, when you're in win now mode, you don't get the same type of leeway. The clock is ticking a lot quicker, and the room for error is as slim as it gets.
Do you think they are wasting the prime of Devin Booker and the unbelievable talent of Kevin Durant over the last 2 years?
I find it's hard for me to say waste because I don't think it's intentional. However, it's been very flawed with the process of building a roster around those two. And I mean, you also got to say the coaches that they decided to bring in, neither one of them has worked up to the level that they've needed it to. They haven't gotten a sustained response out of the pieces around them either. And I feel like that's a big part in, if you're coaching the team that is as top heavy as this team is, can you have the reach to the best players, but you also have to be able to get the role players needed for your system to be successful, and then put said pieces in position around those two to help complement everything that they do on both ends of the floor. And we haven't seen that. So, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody's doing it intentionally.
Sure.
You would never intentionally waste that. But yeah, they have wasted. And previous to this ownership group in this front office, they wasted 7 years of Devin Booker's prime. Yeah. He's had 3 that he's fully had a roster that supports him with it. And this is a failure and wasting it. But again, it's blame from top to bottom, right? And even some of it, has to go to Book and KD as well, because they're on the court, they're in the locker room, they have some control, some semblance of control when it comes to it. But you are most certainly wasting, the greatness that has been Kevin Durant and what has been another very good Devin Booker season. I know we want to say, oh, it's a down season. It's not. You go look at the stats, you're like, yeah, but that's still, a top 20 player in the NBA, and you're sub 500. This has been a catastrophic failure, but the question is why? Why has it been? And I'm going to let Stephen cook after the break, because Stephen has looked at the stats. The man has broken down the film. We're going to talk about it after this. Can I let you in on a secret?
What's up?
I actually hate driving. I hate it. But with my friends at Waymo, I don't have to worry about it. It's a completely autonomous vehicle service with no human behind the wheel, and they've been doing it since 2015, right? They are one of the pioneers in this. They're the first company to have that, and I love taking my Waymo because I don't make enough to own a Jaguar, but I can borrow one for a few minutes. When I use the Waymo One app, I get my Jaguar I-Pace vehicle that comes in. It's fully electric, so 0 emissions, so I don't feel guilty that I'm killing the planet too while I'm doing this. And I can hail this and just get in, listen to my tunes. I'm not sharing it with anybody else because I don't like other people. So I can just get in a Waymo and go where I'm going. I'm going to use it for spring training. Download the Waymo One app and ride today. It is just that easy. And you know what? What else is easy? Going to Phoenix Raceway. I had never been. I went last year and I thought, oh, it's an oval. How cool could this be, right? No. It is a beautiful venue. I would go as far to say as the most beautiful venue in the valley. The views from it, the place itself, the racetrack itself is unbelievable. And you know what's even better? The racing. It is fantastic. NASCAR Shriners Children's 500 is coming to Phoenix Raceway March 7th through the 9th, and you're going to have an experience like no other as NASCAR stars battle at 200 miles an hour. I rode in a pace car at 100 miles an hour on the track, and it was crazy. I can't imagine 200 miles per hour on that 1 mile oval in the foothills of the Estrella Mountains. If you haven't been to the Estrella Mountains, Those are very nice as well. So make sure to get your tickets today at phoenixraceway.com and be there in person for the Shriners Children 500 at Phoenix Raceway. So before the break, we teased it, but you went through a lot of the metrics and advanced metrics for this season to try to figure out what's going on with this team. And I want to start off with the Phoenix Suns offense here and take a look at kind of the stats that have defined this season compared to last season and what they actually mean in terms of how this team has found itself where it is.
Yeah. We can start with the offensive rating for the team so far this season. And I feel like that's one that's left more to be desired than most things. So looking at this season in comparison to last season, so far this season, they had an offensive rating of 115.1, which ranks 13th in the league. That is not where this team desired to be. And looking at last season, they finished 9th. And they reached as high as about 3rd and sometimes even 2nd at multiple stretches last season. Now, if you look at last season's roster and this season's roster, there's obviously a lot of overlap between Kevin, the big three in general, as well as Grayson Allen. What's been changed is a lot of the things on the margins for this team, including more time with players like Royce O'Neal that came at the trade deadline last year. So you would expect for a continuity as well as an offensive-minded head coach that's been brought in to give you the slightest bit of a bump and just basically sustaining at like a top 7 at worst level. They haven't been there. They've been more middle of the pack than they have been elite this season. And before I kind of dive into that, I'm curious, what part about that part of their offense has caught your attention, maybe desired more in comparison to last season?
Yeah, somehow it feels less fluid even than last season, right?
Yeah.
Less consistent. And I know we'll get into some of the three-point shooting and those numbers, but it hasn't felt like, I don't want to say like there isn't a plan. And I know to play random is part of it, but it doesn't feel like the system or the players understand what is trying to be accomplished. And I think that's been the weirdest part to me because they had their flaws last year and we weren't big fans of Kevin Young's system at times, but it somehow feels like they took a step back in that regard when you were hiring a coach that everybody felt, okay, you know, we have a Ferrari offensively and now we got a guy that's focuses on that. We should be moving at top speed, and it just hasn't happened.
That is very accurate from everything that I've seen and everything that I've rewatched this season, even seeing it live. Sometimes it feels like they're operating without a plan at times. And that's definitely a credit to some of the defenses that they've gone up against and the ways that teams have looked to guard them in specific actions that they want to get into. But when you have the top end pieces that they have, you're supposed to, as well as the head coach who's been lauded for his offensive successes and the nuances with it and how connected they typically feel in that end. I haven't seen it this season consistently enough. Outside of that opening stretch, the first like 4 weeks of the season, it's been very high, very low, and everywhere in between. And you can point to the coach at times. You can point to the turnovers at times. You can point to some of the decision-making. But comprehensively, they just have not been connected.
I mean, you bring up the defenses, though. Isn't part of an offensive system that if you can't get into that first set, that there's a secondary and tertiary things that come off of it? Like after we got off the show last night, the tail end of the Mavs-Warriors game was on, right? And I turned to you and Gerald, and I said, did you see that? Like, I think it was Max Christie, got the ball just below the nail and immediately knew where he looked at the basket and knew he didn't have it and knew where his guy was cutting from to hit him in the system. And it's like, I rarely, if ever, see those moments with the Suns where it's like, if that first thing doesn't work, it doesn't feel like there's subsequent things you're looking for in that offense.
Yeah, that is playing random. And it's tough for the Suns because it's more predictable the ways in which they have to play random because of how Devin Booker and Kevin Durant get to the ball in their respective areas of the court they like to operate in. But that just hasn't felt connected enough in a way in which it feels like they always have a counter to an opponent's way that they're trying to play them or the shots they're trying to suggest for them to take. And that's something I talked with Tyus Jones earlier this season, probably early November-ish, about at that point in the season, it felt like they were cycling through pressure counters. If a team tried to take away Kevin Durant or Devin Booker coming off a pin down, they had counters for that. Sometimes it was a backdoor. Sometimes they would just reject that screen, and then they would get into a secondary layer of an action that they wanted to run. But they would do so at a cadence where they didn't lose flow. And it feels like now when they're met with resistance, they lose their flow, the shot clock bleeds, and then they have to put it on Devin Booker or Kevin Durant to put the Superman cape on and take a bad shot at the end of the clock. Now, yes, they can make those shots, but what good is it if you're taking those shots from the first quarter through the fourth quarter instead of just in the fourth quarter?
Yeah, it looks like they toss a lot of grenades too late in the. It's
Definitely.
like, oh, here, take a
Definitely.
bad shot because
Yeah.
I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
And not Devin Booker and Kevin Durant, the
Mhm.
team as a whole.
Mhm.
What's weird to me though is I watched a lot of. I know this comes as a surprise to some of you. Yeah, I have watched film before. I watched
Mhm.
a lot of Coach Bud's system, primarily in Milwaukee, not a lot from Atlanta. But even in that 5-out system, there was a lot of rotation and movement. And I don't think we're even seeing that at times, where it just feels like guys kind of get locked in on their spot in the perimeter, and there's not even the movement in that while playing random.
Yeah, it feels more stagnant than the offenses we saw from Bud in Milwaukee or in Atlanta if you were watching basketball back then too. Those teams had, whether it was scripted or whether it was them playing random, players were hardly ever in the same spot for more than like 4 or 5 seconds.
Yeah.
It might have an initial spacing template that you're trying to get into an action in. If that doesn't work, or if it does work, there are directive responses from all 4 other players who don't have the ball happening around to where the defense can't just comfortably load up Grayson Allen, who is a player that sits still the least on this team. If he's just happening to sit there for 5 seconds, that person's just going to creep over more and more, shrink the floor, and now you've bled away the shot clock and you've created zero advantage. It feels like there's more scenarios like that for the Suns this season than I anticipated with Mike Budenholzer at the helm. And that leads to me just feeling like at times they don't have a plan. Like I know sometimes Devin Booker and Kevin Durant can operate as offenses in and of themselves because of the spaces that they operate in and the requisite attention that defenses have to give, but you have to have more. There has to be an and then what piece to it.
Yeah.
You got the ball to KD in the post, and then what? Is everybody sitting there watching? Are you setting that flare screen that you like to set with your center so that opposing center can't just send a double team? Are you doing the little things past just getting the ball where you want it to be after that?
Well, we talked a lot this season about the 3-point shooting and the approach on that, and that was a big emphasis of Coach Bud. I was actually kind of surprised looking at these numbers compared to last year.
Mm-hmm. The
eye test suggests one thing. These numbers maybe suggest a little bit different.
Yeah, no, if we could get those numbers up on the screen so that we can kind of see the comparison of 3-point shooting from this season and last season. So obviously the big thing that Bud came in outside of random was getting up the 3-point volume. He felt like that was a positive for the team. And as you can see at the bottom of the screen here, 14.1 3-pointers made per game, ranked 7th this season, compared to the 12.4 that they made last season, which ranked 20th. Yeah. So there's been positive there, but as we see, if we transition to either the attempts or the percentages, you'll see why it suggests that they should be taking more than they already are this season. So, see, only 37.6 attempts for them this season, which ranks 13th. That's good, but that's not where they were hoping to be. We heard 40s.
Mm-hmm.
We heard 40s. That 40 would put you top third of the league and really put you at like top 7 or 8. And their roster suggests that they should be taking and making those shots at a certain clip.
It's crazy that they only were at 32.6 last year, and this is a big improvement. So, but it's still not enough, and it's not consistent, right?
Exactly.
We see 55 one night and 23 the next, and I get it. Sometimes defenses impact that, but I don't think that much, and I think sometimes they're not quite sure, again, who they are. Is their identity bombs away? Is it, like Boston or not? And it vacillates so much that you get these weird shifts where you would think they want to be over that 40 mark, but then some nights they're 2/3 of that somehow.
Yeah. But think about in the games, and this is for everybody, just think about the games where they have gotten north of 40 attempts. How often are those games also married with them having upwards of 27 or 28 assists on the game, if not more than that? More often than not, it's over 30.
Yeah.
That's speaks to the style of play that they, when they do play to it, the result is this. And when they don't, the result is that.
Yeah.
When the ball is moving, they're getting in the secondary drives, paint touch after paint touch, playing in transition, getting the double teams blended in with Kevin Durant, getting double teams blended in with Devin Booker. When there's like a harmony to the offense in layers, and it's not just one steady diet of one thing, when they're able to throw 3-4 different things, keep a defense off balance, that's when they're at their best. And they don't play to that often enough. Some of that comes from the defense, which we'll speak to later. But just generally speaking, it doesn't feel like they press the buttons that they have at their disposal often enough at times. And that leads to the inconsistency in process that we see often.
Yeah, and I think one of the bigger concerns was, if they shoot more, they're going to shoot a worse percentage. But when you look at the numbers, in reality, that hasn't been the case. I mean, when you see the percentage this year compared to last year, I mean, they shot 38.2% last year, which was 5th best. They're shooting 37.6%, which is 7th best right now on a higher volume. And you could argue that probably, if you removed the first 4 weeks for Grayson Allen, that number is probably closer to where it was last year, because he's been hitting again at an efficient clip since then. So the numbers net out. You should be shooting more threes because it isn't impacting how much you're making them.
Yeah. And that for me just continues to come back to process. How are you generating those shots? Are they the grenades that you spoke to, where we've wasted 22 seconds and now we got to just throw up a shot and it's not a rush? It's not a player's best or typical shot. Like, those little things matter, especially for rhythm over the course of a game too, for role players especially. And again, to that point, it just doesn't feel like they've played to their strengths in the way in which I expected for them to coming into this season.
Yeah, I also think, when they move with pace, when the game's a little bit faster, they've seen more success in that too. And I know that's not, look at that genius observation, but I think it's an important part of this is when it gets bogged down, when they're focusing on half court, it changes the dynamic significantly. And those are the situations where you see a Tyus Jones winding up with that shot, or a Ryan Dunn, because the defense is choosing in some ways who's going to get that look, rather than you playing at a pace and moving that ball around and finding the guy that you want to get the shot.
Yeah. Do we have the percentage of time spent in the half court numbers? So if you all look at these two numbers, this is where context is important, because the arbitrary numbers themselves can be just whatever. But when you apply the context to like why it's relevant, this season the Suns are 27th in percentage of possessions spent in the half court. That's largely because they're often taking the ball out of the net. And it's because of their defense. Can't get stops. You can't not go up against the half court defense, a defense that's set. A lot of their offensive process this season was supposed to be them playing off of their defense in some viable capacity. What that might be, we're not sure. We haven't seen it in quite some time, but in the pockets in which we have seen them do so, the offense is high octane. They put up 120 in the blink of an eye, and they in doing that, they also get up north of 40 attempts from three a game and knock those down at 35, 36%. So when there's a missing piece from their process, the margin of error is pretty much non-existent at this point for them.
Well, and you bring up the defense, but it's also the live ball turnovers, because
that's a huge
you
part
give up
too.
the easy layup. Yeah, again, you're starting from under your basket. Defense is set. You're not being able to force that. So, I mean, it is, we've heard Eddie Johnson on Outside Shots talk about how the defense, playing energetic defense can bleed into the offense playing better and vice versa. But yeah, it feels like the defensive part is such a staggering blind spot for this team that impacts the offense. And Steven's going to cook when we get there after the break, when we take a look at the defense and what portions of it aren't working there. We're going to talk about our friends at Pure Edibles. They have some of the best edibles in the game. And you know what? I heard Eric Ruby talking about him, right? And I was like, man, this guy sells it really good, but can it really live up to the hype? And I'm like, I don't know. And then I partook, and I'll tell you, it lives up to the hype. They are spectacular. Their flavors, you know, I'm a big flavor guy. Like, I don't like the edibles that have a little too much of that. Like, you can taste it, right? You know, I'm having an edible. I prefer where it's like I'm having an edible, but I'm having a snack, you know, kind of too. And I really enjoy what they do at Pure Edibles. It is fantastic, and you're gonna want to check them out for sure. They are the premier edible in the game, and I want you to check them out. Check out their kicks as well. They are spectacular. It is Pure Edibles. Check them out today. And then we're going to talk about, before we get to the defense, I know you're chomping at the bit. I promise we'll get to the defense. Our friends over at Bet365, over 90 million people in the world use Bet365, and there's a good reason for that, because it is fantastic and it's never ordinary. When you use it, they have some of the best payouts in the game, and that's because if you bet for your team in the NBA to win, if they go up by 20 points, doesn't matter if they lose, you're automatically going to cash that portion of your bet. Now, you don't get to use that a lot with the Suns, I'm sorry, but if you're dabbling in other things, other teams, you can get that for sure. Customers now get $100 in bonus bets when you bet $5, win or lose. So if you suck like I do at this right now this year, you're still going to get that $100 in bonus bets. Bonus bets can be used on spread, total, player props, futures, and more. So whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Must be 21 and over, physically located in Arizona. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem and wants help, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP. Text NEXT STEP to 53342 or visit problemgambling.az.gov. The defense, Steven. We alluded to it last segment. Not good, Bob. Not good.
This the side where they've left the most to be desired. It's the side where they felt most lost. It's the side where their weaknesses have been exposed the most. And my question is, and I can pose it to you, who genuinely has shown that they care about the defensive end of the floor for this team?
I know that this might not be popular, but I feel like Bradley Beal has at times. Kevin Durant most certainly has this year, but that list is a small one, and one that with effort being such a huge part of defense, it's felt like they've severely lacked that at times this year. Am I wrong?
I think that's very accurate. That is very accurate.
Ryan Dunn as well. I don't want to for sure. I don't want to forget Ryan Dunn, but when you think defense, it's easy to just go, yeah, he's in a category by himself when we're talking about this. He does it the right way and works his ass off.
Yeah, him and Royce are in the stratosphere they're on as far as that goes. But outside of those two, I think you would be accurate in mentioning those two as well, Bradley Beal and Kevin Durant. That's 4 players.
Yeah. And to be fair, Nick Richards, since he's shown up, has shown a propensity for altering shots and putting forth effort. But again, anybody in that center position is going to have a tough time when the other guys aren't performing at a high level, and basically they're having to help when guys get in the lane and abandon their own man. So
that's where it gets tricky for this team, because when you don't have players that you can rely on to do their job at the point of attack, whether it be sending a player to the right hand or the left hand based off of what action the opponent offense is trying to run, or just generally staying square between their man and the ball without having to have their help defense engaged. If you can't just do that part of the defense, now your center's in compromise for 20-some-odd seconds of the shot clock. There's only like 2 centers that can do that and be still effective. And even that comes with some variance for those players as well. You have to be better at the point of attack and just generally on the perimeter for them to be even just solid in pockets, which is where I always kind of gauge that they could be. I always say they could be a top 15 defense. I don't feel like that was out of the realm.
No. I mean,
they've shown that. Yeah. They've shown that. But the issue is they also have shown that they can very much not be that as well. And they do that at the most untimely points of games, where if you're switching, your switching should be its most sharp when you're relying on it in the fourth quarter. And they don't have it at times when they do decide to switch. Same thing with the rest of their defensive packages and coverages based off of whatever lineups they're using. It always comes back to consistency with this team, and they can't find it in pockets of games where they need it most. And I feel like because of that, the offense is being held back from potentially reaching this ceiling with this team just because they can't play to it in a way in which helps their offense by way of their defense.
Yeah, so you pulled a bunch of numbers. Which ones do you want to start with to kind of make the point about this defense in the first half of the season?
We can start with the general defensive rating numbers, comparing it to this season compared to last. So you see the huge downslide.
Slightly different?
Yeah, just a little bit. Just a little bit. I know it's close to 3 points in terms of the actual number difference, but that jump in rating in comparison, ranking wise, is what you really want to look at.
Yeah, I mean, 12th last season, all the way to 27th, and they were 114.3 defensive rating for all last season. They're 117.2 defensive rating. Sometimes these can be confusing. How much does that roughly 3-point differential actually represent in terms of not just how far you fall in the ranking, but in a game-to-game perspective? Because it seems like a huge amount when you consider it.
It is a huge amount. It seems like one possession, but when it hits over the course of an entire season's worth or a little over half a season's worth of play, it hits differently. And when you put the eye test to the number that you're looking at, imagine all of the moments where the Suns have not been able to get a stop when they need it most. In the fourth quarters especially, that's one piece of it. But over the course of games, to keep themselves away from being down 20 in the fourth quarter, they also struggle there too. And some of that comes from the point of attack. You can start with Tyus Jones on that. He hasn't been – you knew he wasn't going to be a plus defender. You just thought he could get to a certain level to where he wouldn't impact you to the extent that he has this season. He just hasn't had it. They've tried different schemes with him, show him recover at times. They've tried to put him under screens with guards. They've tried to hide him on the player that can't really shoot the best on the opposing teams. None of that has worked because they found a way to bring him in primary action or allow for that player that he is guarding to directly be able to attack him. And it's been met with hardly any resistance at multiple stretches so far.
So is there a chance that they got confused and they decided to play random on defense and not offense?
I mean, that's what the numbers suggest.
It just feels like they're scrambling,
what the numbers
right?
would suggest that to the scrambling point. Because they can't contain at the point of attack, they're always in position to have to help. And then there's scenarios where when someone has to help, that means either someone's going to be unaccounted for if no one helps for the helper, or someone's just going to be wide open. And they have not been good scrambling on defense this season because of the volume of leaks that they've had in their defense, starting with the point of attack. The point of attack has been the team's weakest spot on the roster in terms of their defense. And that's exactly why I feel like, for one, Ryan Dunn has to play a certain number of minutes if he's healthy after the All-Star break. Knock on wood, hopefully he is healthy if he's not already. And he gets the requisite amount of minutes for his impact to be felt on that end. Because when he was healthy and he's playing 25 minutes, he's picking up guys 94 feet. He's sending guys to their weekend or sending them directly to the center, making their job easier and keeping players from being engaged to help in a way in which we haven't seen all season. I also think Cody Martin will very much help with that specific dynamic of their defense as well.
Let's just say it. I mean, if Tyus Jones went to a museum, he couldn't stop a statue from getting around him and getting to the rim. That's been a huge part of this, because last year, say what you will about the lineup, but going Book, Beal out there, Grayson out there at times, like that was a better defensive unit, just A, size, B, effort, and C, some raw ability with it. I don't think that accounts for everything, but I think that's got to be at least a huge part of what we're seeing different defensively, right?
It is. And this is not to criticize Tyus' effort, because I don't think it's a lack of effort. I think it might be more ability than effort, but there's an activity level that even when Grayson has been hunted, which he was certainly hunted in that starting group last season. He plays with a certain activity level. He's also still bigger on top of that, to where it's not going to be as easy to exploit him. If you want to target him as a helper, if you want to target him directly involved guarding the ball handler, or you want to target him in the post, things like that, he can hold up his own or combat the advantage that they're trying to create in different ways.
Yeah, it felt like a lot of times his was size related and trying to find a mismatch with that, where with Tyus, it just feels like there's so many.
It feels like there's no
mismatches.
real right answer to get to with him.
Yeah,
you can't really hide him. If you put him at the point of attack, now he's got to guard elite level guards. And saw what happened with Jalen Green, saw what happened with John Morant. You can go down the laundry list of names this season where he's been guarding players and it hasn't had any impact for the defense.
Let's talk about impacting opponents' shots. I know you pulled some effective field goal percentage numbers here. Why don't we take a look at those and kind of walk us through those as well?
Yeah, so looking at this season, well, we can start with last season. Last season, obviously, the defense was better. And you see the effective field goal percentage is not a huge difference for these two specific numbers we're looking at. But that's where you have to apply your eye test. And how often have you seen Suns opposing teams shoot open shots against them this season compared to last season?
Immensely, a lot.
That speaks to the breakdowns that we spoke to. That speaks to their lack of ability to defend effectively when scrambling that we just got done speaking to. Defense, at the end of the day, the most important thing before a rebound is a contest. If you can't get up an effective contest, you don't even have the opportunity to go for a rebound to stamp a stop because teams are shooting wide open shots. And it feels like this season, more often than not, because of the ways in which the Suns have to scramble, players are left wide open at varying moments in the shot clock. And when they're able to get these type of shots so consistently because of the breakdowns and the volume of those from the Suns defense, puts them in limbo, and it's hard to do what you want to do, which is get stops. But the other thing is, not compared to last season, but specific to this season, second chance points. That's been one of the biggest things. It hasn't been alarming, but it's been enough in pockets of games where it's meaningful to where just last night we saw it. You can see all of those second chance points in addition to the turnovers, and you go from what was a 12 or 13, 14-point lead in the fourth quarter to now being down 6. And now Kevin Durant has to come in and try to combat the resistance that was already met when he was down.
I feel like second chance points became a massive issue when the drama with Yusuf Nurkic came into play, because it dramatically impacted your center rotation, your rebounding, because say what you will about Yusuf Nurkic and all the stuff that came along with him, but rebounding was never one of those things that
he's elite at that.
Yeah. I mean,
even on his worst day, he's elite as a rebounder.
Yeah. I mean, and without that's dramatically changed that portion of it too. Connor in the chat says, do you think the communication is part of the reason too on defense? And I think that's got to be a huge part of it, because if you're not communicating with me, I don't know what's coming or what I'm missing, like, or where we're going to switch or go under, you know, and those kind of things on the fly, it makes it real difficult to play as a cohesive unit, right?
Yeah, the communication part has not really been there for them. And to that point, you can see multiple moments where they're talking between plays, or someone has their hands up like, yo, where was this next rotation at? You already knew I was coming here to do this, and you weren't there to do that. There's a lot of palms facing straight up to the ceiling oftentimes with them. And that speaks to just a lack of communication, but also the lack of connectedness. To play the style of defense that is successful in a sustained manner, you have to be connected. They haven't been either one of those two things. And again, it all stems from individual ability defensively. If you have just 2 or 3 players that can stay in front of the ball in a viable manner, that helps everybody else's involvement with the defense to be less if you're in a help scenario. And that keeps you from scrambling, keeps your shell intact, and allows you to be more successful. But they just have not had it in the ways in which they needed to with this roster this season.
I want to continue our discussion on defense, and we will get into some more numbers, but I got a little something for the people. And caught Noah off guard as well. Spinato's Pizzeria. I can do that. I'm Italian, so it's nothing offensive about it when I do it. I love Spinato's. I just recently got one out near me in Gilbert. The family goes out there on a regular basis. We got dietary issues. My wife has celiac, as does my daughter. So it's not easy always to find pizza. They have fantastic options for that. And then the regular crust is just unbelievable. The sauce is fantastic. Not all pizza sauces are made the same, right? Theirs is some of the best in the world. And guess what? They're Suns fans just like us. They are a proud partner of the Phoenix Suns, and they have watch parties throughout the season where you can watch the game with Suns dancers and the Gorilla. I can't wait. We're going to have a March 28th watch party. Me and the Gorilla are going to have some conversations because he has not been to the elite level. I need him to. They also play horse, but they play it as PIZZA, and you're going to have a chance to win tickets and free pizza for a year when you go out there and play. What's better than free tickets and free pizza? Seeing us out there when you get to actually try to win those as well. So mark your calendar, Suns fans. The excitement starts at Spinato's. Get all the information on watch parties and pizza basketball contests at SpanatosPizzeria.com. Spinato's official pizzeria of the Phoenix Suns and PHNX for that matter, and the official vehicle of the PHNX Suns crew is a Sanderson Ford, and why wouldn't it be? They have the best cars in the valley, and right now the clock is ticking. And no, that's not on the Phoenix Suns. It's on the Sanderson Ford 48-hour President's Day sale that starts today in celebration of Arizona being the 48th state of the union and Ford trucks being #1 in sales in Arizona and across the country for 48 straight years. Sanderson Ford is having a 48-hour only sale on over 800 new and pre-owned vehicles, many with savings of $4,800 or more. Save $4,800 on the 2024 Bronco Sport, a beautiful car, plus get an additional $480 gift card, Visa gift card with every new vehicle purchased. These offers last for only 48 hours from today through Monday. You're saying that's more than 48 hours. They're closed on Sundays because they let their people have their Sundays off. So from now through Monday, make sure to get out there. Bronco Badlands offer includes $1,000 RBC, $1,750 RCC cash, and $1,000 Jeep Open Conquest cash you must qualify for. Visa card not valid on AX, Z, or D plans or Raptors, Tremor trucks, and specialty vehicles. Let's hop right back into Takun says, I always thought Espo was Swedish or Switzerlandish. No, Italian. Surprise, surprise. So Steven, let's hop back into the last few defensive stats that we have to look at here. And, when you talk about the Suns and turnovers, you're usually talking about the offensive end, but defensively, they also have had some impact on the way that this season's gone.
Yeah, so we heard them talk about wanting to play with pace, play in the open court, be able to get ahead of the defense and play in the advantage before the defense can get set. Only ways in which you can do that, for one, if you're getting stops in a sustained manner, and you're not going to get stops for 48 full minutes, so can you find pockets where you're able to do that to allow for your defense to set the table for your offense? The other way in which you can do that, forcing some turnovers. And Noah, with the numbers provided at the bottom, we appreciate that. You see that no different than last season, but even taking on a slightly worse level, they're just not forcing turnovers. And this speaks to the margin for error that I'm talking about the Suns have with their general game process. If you want to play with pace, you have to play a certain level of activity defensively to where if you're not picking up players 94 feet, you're swarming in the passing lanes or you're swarming at the point of attack, funneling players to certain pockets of the court where they can only make a pass with their left hand. And if it's an errant pass, you got a turnover, you're going the other way. They don't get a lot of deflections. They don't force a lot of steals and get turnovers like that, which we see the numbers indicating at the bottom of the screen. And that's a lot of why their offensive process isn't where they want it to be as well.
I guess maybe not surprisingly, they weren't exactly great at it last year either.
Yeah.
Of all these, this is probably the least change that we saw year over year, but just because they were terrible at it last year doesn't give them a pass at being terrible at this year. Yeah.
Do you know who led the Suns in deflections last season?
Royce, even though he came in late in the season. I don't know.
Yusuf Nurkic.
Interesting.
And the reason why I bring up Nurkic, especially because most people don't want to hear his name anymore, he got all of the attention for the things that he couldn't do on offense, but he was rock solid defensively. They were almost like 7 or 8 points better defensively when he was on the court last season versus when he wasn't. Activity with his hands. Yes, he plays drop coverage. Occasionally, he gets up to the level of the screen before getting back into that. But his template for defense is being in drop. His hands are always active. And with last season's roster, his hands were the most active. So fast forward to this season, the lack of activity that we're speaking to that allows for them to play in transition, that's why I see a role for someone like Cody Martin coming in, because he's ever active. He knows how to stay in front of the ball, whether he's in pick and roll. He's good with help. He's good with rim protection, and he plays a style of defense that causes activity, whether he's getting it or he helps for someone else to be put in a position to do so. Those things are as positive when you're trying to put a puzzle piece together for a team.
Did the system impact, Nurk's ability to do that again this year? Was there some fundamental change in that from his perspective and from this defense's perspective overall?
I think it was the defense just not being connected.
Gotcha.
And that's, again, comes back to the point of attack. Last season, their point of attack defense was better comprehensively than this season, what we've seen. And with that, if you're looking at it in drop coverage, with Yusuf Nurkic, his job is to just keep the ball in front while staying attached to the roller in some capacity. How many times this season has he had to go from towing that line between the ball handler and the roller to committing to the ball handler because the person that got screened got hit on the screen and now the person with the ball is wide open? Yeah. Drop coverage is immediately undone, and now you got all these leaks all over the place when you can't be connected to the ball with that person that's navigating the screen. So that's a difference in this season, in it being one of the worst in the league, to last season where it was closer to average than it was bad.
Half court defense is another big difference this year, looking at it at the rating. I mean, last year they were 11th at 97.4. This year they're 26th at 99.9. And this is one, too, where we'll hear people say, well, maybe if they can sneak into the playoffs, everything, maybe they'll have a run. When you can't play half-court defense, when you're second worst in the league at that, 26th worst, so 4 teams there. But, when you're that bad, you're not going to have a chance when it comes down to the way that the game's played in the postseason.
Yeah, you can't have the volume of issues that they have defensively and expect to win in a sustained manner, especially against the contending teams. And to that point, you have to pick one. You can't say we're not going to be good at the point of attack, and then we're also not going to rebound the basketball. And then we're also not going to play a style of defense that forces turnovers. And we're also going to play a style of defense that's reacting to our opponents. That's 4 different things. You can't have all 4 of those baked into one process and find success. You have to take something off the table. And to that point, what have the Suns taken off the table from their opponents this season?
Nothing.
They've tried the ice teams, and they can't contain the ball well enough without the guard being able to ultimately still get to the paint.
Yeah.
Drop coverage concedes the mid-range to opponents that can't navigate screens. It's just a multitude of things. And again, like we talked about last night, when their issues start to hit, they avalanche. It's not ever just one. It's like 2.5 to 3 of those problems all in the one.
If you're watching us on TV, we appreciate you. But head over to gophnx.com, because I promise you, we're going to keep going. And Steven has a solution to fix all this. He's got the answers. Okay, maybe not. But come join us over at gophnx.com and leave a like when you get over there as well. If you haven't done it yet, we got a 100 like goal. It's real low today. Hit that for us. A couple other defensive stats to look at, or at least one more, is how the percent of time in the half court from a defensive perspective. And again, you're bad at half court defense, right? So what would you want to do? Not be in half court defense as much as you could be. And the Suns are 29th in that. They've been half court defense 76.8% of the time, where last year, they were 20th in the league in this.
Again, it just goes back to the point that I made before. You have to choose a weakness and find ways to try to mitigate it as much as you can. But when it's 4, 5, 6 different things, and most of them all hit at one time, you give yourself no margin for error. It's like trying to carry 8 buckets of water so that you don't have to take 2 trips. If you can't do it without all of the water spilling out, then what's the point? You might as well just take your time and get it done, or find some help from an external source. And that's what they're trying to do with Cody Martin. I just hope that Bud actually gives them opportunity. Yeah. But if we're not talking about it from a personnel standpoint, there are things schematically that they need to try more and just experiment. Find something that sticks at this point. Are you going to try to play some zone defense at some point if you just can't stay in front of the ball? Like, zone defense is a different animal in terms of what you have to do to be successful. But if you can't play man, and the only thing you want to play is drop coverage, whether that big is closer to the level and then dropping back, or if he's chilling in the paint, find something else. You have to try something else. And I get that they've tried it with their small ball lineups and been able to switch more. But you have to be able to find ways to do that without conceding the size. And like I've talked about multiple times this season, we saw it with Houston last night. We've seen it with other teams against the Suns. They put a small player on the center and put a center on a non-shooter and allow for the center to just kind of direct traffic from behind everything. That allows you to switch more effectively, keeps your shell intact, and it keeps your players from having to navigate as many screens, and that's not a strong suit of the Suns team either.
So we've isolated what's wrong with this team. They're not good on defense or offense. No, but we've taken a look at a lot of the smaller details as to why things have happened this way. But break is only a week long. They come back with a small portion, probably about a third of the year left, and they've got that they're not even in the play-in right now. They got that long trek to get in to the play-in and potentially into the playoffs. Is there a legitimate path to actually improving any of this to get to where you are playing good enough basketball to at least be playing past the middle of April?
I still think so. And a lot of my answer stems from the trust and belief in a roster or a team that has Kevin Durant and Devin Booker on it. That means that your offense, if you play to your strengths, should be at a certain level that can go jab for jab with any other team in the NBA, regardless of who's on the opposing team's roster, regardless of what they might try to do to those players. The strong suit of the team is offense. I think they should lean more into those strengths, but finding a way to sustain or at least stay afloat defensively. 27th in defensive rating is not staying afloat. No. That's called an open door that you're just leaving and just saying, hey, you want to go here? Go ahead. Yeah. You can't be so reactive to what your opponents are doing. You got to take something off the table with the defense. And I think they need to lean more into their switching to make teams, if not force them to certain pockets of the court, at least make them work later in the shot clock and not concede an advantage so early on. So they need to just try more defensively, I think. And in that also comes with change in personnel. Tyus Jones' days as a starter should be done. It should have been done at least a week or two ago, but coming out of the All-Star break, they should be done. That's one step in the right direction. Who you think should start in place of Tyus? I don't think there's a wrong answer. It could be Ryan Dunn. It could be Bradley Beal. It could be Grayson Allen. It
could be anybody.
I wouldn't bat an eye at either one. Yes. I wouldn't bat an eye at either one of those three because they bring something different that he does or did, but also bring it with size. I think him in the 6-man role as a point guard makes more sense for this roster based off of what we've seen this season, and it allows for them to be a little bit more flexible defensively.
I think there's one path and one path only, and I don't know that they'll go down this, and I hate this because I don't like calling for anybody's job, but I think the path is moving on from Coach Bud and naming an interim coach off that staff and trying to have an exhaustive search this summer to figure out your front office and figure out if they can chart a course as to what their vision is, and then find a coach that aligns with it. Right now, I think they need a different voice in that room. That's the lead voice, somebody that maybe has more experience with both offense and defense, and try to get these guys to lock in for the rest of the way, right? I hate calling for a guy's job, but I feel like that's the one path and the one lever you have left to pull if you're going to do anything that has impact on the rest of the way. Because sitting here and expecting this to change without any legitimate change within the room, I just don't see happening. And I'm fine with them admitting they got it wrong again, as long as there is a path to adding different decision makers in that before you make your next coaching hire and the process that goes about it. Because if you're going to make that admission, which I think they will at the end of the season and into the off season, then it's okay to make the admission right now that maybe Coach Bud wasn't the right guy because in retrospect, we didn't have the right guys making the decisions with it. So I think that's the one path I see to actually trying to make some kind of run the rest of the way. And it's not a cure-all, but I think it might be the one thing that gives you maybe a slight more bit of hope than you have right now.
Yeah, and you you alluded to last season. They acknowledged they had the Ferrari, and they pressed their foot on the gas a little bit more than this season's coaching staff did. Maybe a new coach pulls some different strings that Bud didn't, or has a reach which allows for the trust to be there. So when he does pull those strings, there's a little bit more want to in terms of doing it, in terms of execution, and that might help. That might be enough to get them into the play-in, and they're 3.5 games out of the 6 seed. So that's still not out of the realm of possibility either, even amidst all the inconsistencies or lack thereof and desire to see more that we broke it down in today's episode.
Well, and like we talked about on the defensive end, so much of it is effort, right? And how do you get effort out of people if the person that's asking for it maybe doesn't have the ear or can't motivate guys, and maybe somebody else can. And if there is that belief, then maybe they go try just enough where you're better enough, and then the offense is slightly better and things start to change with your fortune. We have a few super chats that I want to get to, at least one before we get out of here. You have one from Psycho Blue. B-Ball Cthulhu thinks that owner meddling is hard when you can only do it over the phone. Also, what identity was displayed when Monty came to Detroit, especially where are they now? Okay, Monty, when he came to Detroit, the identity was, I want my paycheck. And he made it very clear by turning them down multiple times.
Yeah, and he was the highest paid coach in history until San Antonio said,
Yeah.
Which understandably so, but that speaks to your point. He was getting his bag.
Oh, and he didn't lie about it. He made it very clear.
Not at all.
That I'm okay. If you're just gonna keep throwing money at me, sure, I'm gonna say yes because it's so much money.
He said he didn't want to coach after the Suns' tenure ended. He said, "I'm chilling." And Detroit came knocking at his door once, knocking at his door twice, and then that third time he was like, "All right, I can't just ignore this many O's after the numbers that you've given me."
Let's be honest. The coaching, the coaching group there, the union, probably would have had his head if he hadn't taken the highest paid coaching job ever.
Exactly.
Regardless, we're making Noah hurt behind the Mac, our resident Detroit guy there. So, sorry, Noah.
But I also think you can't compare the job that he did with the Pistons to his job he did with the Suns, because two completely different franchise contexts, yet alone roster context that he was inheriting. You just can't compare the two.
No, and the results were proven out. I mean, you saw it here. So that is our episode for a Thursday afternoon as we head into the All-Star break. We will be back tomorrow at 3 o'clock. Less looking back at this last season, or this last few months of the season, more looking ahead, having a little fun. We're going to talk All-Star. We're also going to talk about why we fell in love with the game, because it is Valentine's Day tomorrow. I want to give a shout out to my father. Dad, happy 70th birthday. Appreciate all your support and everything. I'm glad at your age you can still hear and see the show. I want to thank Noah behind the Mac. He is taking care of everything. I think I want to call you the mustache behind the Mac, but that was always Shane. So I'm going to call you the mischief behind the Mac. That is Noah. You can follow Steven on Twitter at StevenPG3. You can follow the show at PHNX_Sons. You can follow me at Espo. And until tomorrow, you know what? show some love to everybody in the world. A little empathy could help us all as we head into Valentine's Day. Ahoy, hoy.
We all silly like the mayor.